All right, thanks everyone for joining us today. Um, we'll just give it like another 30 seconds or so, let people roll in. Yeah, this is tradition. We have to like sit here for a little bit in silence. um, all right, seems good enough. All right, so thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Kevin. I'm a research analyst on the block, Pro Research. And I'm joined today with Bogdan, Sanket, and Chris. We're going to be talking about empowering the future of Web3 and building impactful dApps. So to get started, why don't we just go around and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. Maybe Bogdan, you can go first.
Cool. I'm guessing we're doing the alphabetical order.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, makes
hi
sense.
everyone. My name is Bogdan. I'm one of the co-founders and the CTO at Tenderly. Background is 9 or 10 years of distributed systems engineering, although I really like to joke that for the last two-ish years, something like that, I have been professionally writing emails and Slack messages and Notion documents, not to forget the most important one, more or less. But yeah, very much looking forward to participate in the panel, especially as Tenderly has been in the developer tooling and infrastructure space for close to 5 years now. So definitely opinionated about a bunch of topics.
I can go next. Hey guys,
Yeah.
this is Sanket. I head the growth team at Polygon, focusing largely on the business development for anything that's crypto native. So think DeFi, NFT, DAO, tokenization, anything that comes. I've been with Polygon since almost day one, so I've seen kind of the journey from Matic Network to where we are right now, and yeah, happy to kind of walk through on any questions also people have during the discussion.
So at least me. My name is Chris. I'm the head of engineering for Infura. I've worked with Infura for about 4 years as engineering management on Infura for the last 2. I've spent most of my career doing 0 to 1 startups, building a lot of different types of systems for different types of domains. As Bogdan said, most of my job these days is email, Notion, Slack. So, but still very much on the engineering side.
I think this is the worst sell on an engineering leadership position that we could have done, Chris. But yes.
Nice, cool. So I'm excited that you guys are all joining us. And I think we'll have a good discussion today. We'll start off, just get right into it, and kind of get your guys' opinions on, especially from your perspective, what are some of the key challenges that developers building Web3 apps face today, and what are some of the key sort of like barriers, I would say, that need to be, kind of broken down, made easier for the next generation.
Cool. I guess I can start. So the first thing is, I think, steep learning curve. I still feel there's much more educational content right now than, for example, when we were entering the space 5-ish years ago. But I feel most of the content right now is like 0 to 1, if that makes sense. And then the 1 to 10 is now almost non-existent. So everybody can get started, but like what happens from there, people are kind of left to their own devices. And then security, I think, definitely a very important topic, which isn't maybe as important in Web 2, although I'm not the correct person probably to talk about that. And then the third one, I think, is still tooling. I feel kind of sad that I'm going to say tooling, even though a lot of things have built. We did get Truffle, Hardhead, Foundry. I mean, Tenderly, a bunch of these tools started existing in this space. Our company started by us not knowing why a transaction failed, and it kind of snowballed from there. But I think those are like the 3 main differences when people come from Web 2 to Web 3 is not knowing what the hell is going on and like what's my next step. Hey, I have been hacked, and it's like day 2 of my thing existing. And then the third one is, hey, all of these things that they expect exist are only starting to take shape now in Web 3, and then knowing how to basically crawl on broken glass and enjoy it, I guess.
I would agree with that. I would say that one of the challenges in building a Web3 is that it's not a static space, right? If you're talking about application engineering, like traditional Web2 application engineering, it's a fairly well-defined space. There's a lot of frameworks, there's a lot of tools to help you out. With Web3, you sort of have this expanding frontier. So it's like what you used to have to know 2 to 3 years ago is less than what you have to know today, right? Before we didn't have to deal with ZK or layer 2 to an extent. And now it's like the amount of stuff you have to cram into your head to be able to build successfully. There's a lot of choices that you have to make, right? Oh, do I do it on Ethereum mainnet? Do I do it on an L2? Do I need to do it on a ZK? There's sort of like all of these things that you now have to learn. So I think, pursuant to what Bogdan said, you know, the older Ethereum one stuff we have a lot of great tooling for. The stuff that's just coming out or is say within 2 years old, there's less understanding, less developed tooling. And so there's a very fragmented part of the space. You have good articles like for like the 0 to 1 on some things, less so on other things. And so it's very challenging to keep up with.
Yeah, and I think I kind of agree on all 3 points because it's kind of like, you know, someone trying to code on Linux machine and someone expects them to know even like Linux OS or the core. It's kind of like that when you kind of have to learn also what chain you're building on. Apart from that, you know, few things that I feel like, and they're more very intangible, but I think they matter a lot. One is, I think, you know, it's just the lack of good role models. Like, you know, if you take any of this app, like, you know, good sort of let's say you take any sort of framework or any sort of thing, there is always a good role model to look up to, like, which people kind of end up studying and kind of also following. In Web3 right now, the ones that are there, I think, are not like the really good role model. And I think the second, because of that, you know, what happens is like the new folks who are joining, they just find it very difficult. Like I think the best example I feel with Bitcoin like was Andreas Antonopoulos. Like, you know, he was such a big role model, and I don't know how many people he had brought. And it's just very good. Like I think it's just also the kind of leaders that kind of are there in general in Web3 because of, you know, a few things, the way it works in Web3. And I think the second is also incentivization. Like I think the fact is, you know, Web3 by default is, I would say, it's kind of open source. Still people kind of do closed source stuff, but that's kind of the idea. And when that happens, like, you know, as a dev, you kind of work on some of this stuff and just someone comes and forks away and like takes all the credit also in something. I think those sort of incentivization are just not right. So, you know, as a good founder, you really don't have any incentive, you know, to like, if you are a good developer, how do you make 10 more good developers? And the space moves just so fast that, you know, people just don't have time to kind of stop and like think also about some of these things. So I think those 2 things I feel like good role models, and like just the incentivizing structure, like for specifically devs, is just kind of missing.
You guys bring up a lot of interesting points. I think I tend to agree with those kind of views. You know, we were in a pretty interesting space, you know, where like I feel there's this culture of you know, trying to push the technology forward, and there's like a focus on the security and scaling and all these aspects. But then you also have financial incentives like tied very closely, and where, you know, working with digital money all the time, basically. And so it makes sense that, you know, it's kind of challenging to get you know, developers all focused on one thing when some of the financial incentives are moving around so quickly. You know, maybe it's much more profitable to be, you know, making something on some brand new forked chain or something than to, you know, keep working on this hard problem that you're stuck with here. At least that's how I see it. But I've heard you guys all mention sort of like building off of some of the past innovations and moving forward from there. And I'm curious how you guys see the future of blockchain interoperability, and what kind of new developments are you guys excited for? You know, one thing I can, just as a very basic example I can think of, is the EVM and how, you know, just that itself has spread into development onto many other chains. And yeah, curious what you guys think about interoperability, multi-chain future, all that. Just let you guys go ahead.
I can take so I think those two are like very different topics. So I think let me start with multi-chain because I feel like that's kind of easier mentioned. Right now, I think a good thing about this whole multi-chain is there are two parts to it. One is like within the Ethereum or EVM ecosystem as well, and like outside of it. I think outside of it still there are a lot of attack vectors, and I don't think so that's kind of fully developed that well. And I don't think so there are enough effort. Although there are few startups working on this, but I don't think so that immediately solves a lot of things. Coming back to the Ethereum's multi-chain ecosystem, I think this is where probably I would say 95% of developer mindshare is, and I feel like that something is kind of growing very well. Few things I feel specifically like for Polygon, I think we are working on a cross-chain roll-up solution. So for example, like if there is any roll-up on Ethereum ZK based, they can just communicate with each other. Like right now there is a lot of messaging kind of going like message parsing is not very easy and it's just very difficult. I think I like the update like dApp had kind of done. I'm not sure how many to kind of look, but it's called Avocado. It's a very interesting solution. Like use USDC as a gas fees and kind of access all the EVM chains. I feel like those are some of the interesting ones. Obviously, account abstraction is one of them, where I think slightly not multi-chain specifically, but it just helps improve like the user experience of anyone trying to get in. So it doesn't matter as a chain if you support as a dApp you support like 4 or 5 chains. You kind of support account abstraction, doesn't matter which chain it is, the gas will be paid and like people can just kind of use it. I think those are like 3 things that kind of are exciting that I'm kind of seeing, and I feel like that's kind of a good direction. Like EVM based sort of multi-chain is at least that's kind of where the developer mindshare is being focused on, and I think that helps improve like some of this developer experience or even in general user experience of some of these things that are being built.
Sanket, you took like all of the points that I was going to say. So I think what's interesting is that on the L2 side, on the Ethereum rollup side, you're seeing a lot of very similar directions. I think things like Polygon Edge, Avalanche, Subnet, the super chain that that Optimism wants to do. It's all around creating these sort of like application specific chains that are interoperable within that ecosystem, right? And I think there's a lot of power in that because it's sort of like it abstracts various concerns, security against the L1 and Ethereum, right? Interoperability across multiple chains or multiple like application chains, say within a particular ecosystem. Kind of what Sanket was saying, like the weak point in my mind right now is like the bridging. That's something that I don't think anybody has solved. And it's where all of the attacks tend to happen is when you're trying to do cross-chain messaging. So a lot of companies focusing on that now. So I think that's a problem that'll be solved. And again, with things like account abstraction, making it more seamless to move sort of across experiences is a really interesting direction right now. And so like, in my mind, it divides up into 2 or 3 sort of large groups, right? Like interoperability against apps and app chains, security and how things are, either anchored to an L1 or assets move across chains. And then usability, like user experience with account abstraction of like, most people shouldn't have to care about where their stuff is running, what chain they're connecting to, et cetera. Like with something like account abstraction, just to have it from a user standpoint be a seamless experience from the application side. I think it's a really exciting future for interoperability.
I'm not going to echo everyone too much. Kevin, you also mentioned the EVM. I remember when we started WebAssembly, or not WebAssembly, EWASM was a hot topic that it was going to happen. And it was the promise of multiple different runtimes inside of the EVM itself. That kind of didn't pan out, as we can see. I do like that the rollups basically did provide alternative runtimes in some sense. I mean, contracts can run differently, for example, on Arbitrum or Optimism or whatever. I just think that everyone took the EVM to heart because day zero you have all of the tooling, but I think we should even more invest into the EVM itself, because we can end up in a situation where the EVM becomes the Salesforce of Web3, too big to fail but too slow to evolve. And I think it's extremely important to focus on work that can happen there. And what gets me extremely excited is, again, these L2s or L3s or LXYZs, however deep or the rabbit hole we go, to actually think about, hey, if I change this constraint, which doesn't make sense, but made sense on Ethereum L1 as an example, what can the users achieve on this application-specific chain? I think we're still not there, but I think with supernets, super chains, edges, and all of the other variants of the same thing, I think we're going to start seeing the innovation there, which is going to be harder for tooling providers and infrastructure providers, but I think a great win for developers.
Cool. Yeah, I heard a lot of you guys mention account abstraction. Is that just like for some of our viewers who might not know who that is, could one of you possibly explain that? Is that just kind of simplifying the like wallet experience between chains, or like how exactly, like how would you describe it?
I can try to do it in 2 sentences. So
Thanks.
the idea, it's going to be hard in 2 sentences. I guess the idea is, instead of having to have your keys with you in a ledger or MetaMask or whatever, the idea is to have a smart contract variant, or to have a smart wallet that can do stuff on your behalf across multiple chains. And Sanket mentioned the dApp Avocado wallet. It's amazing because you use one wallet, you pay in one currency, and you transact over like 10 different chains. I don't know how many actually. So that cannot be done without account abstraction. So it kind of enables these use cases where when you use the internet, you pay for your internet to the ISP with the US dollar. We can think of the ISP as the account abstraction in this analogy. Imagine if you went to, I don't know, facebook.com, and you have to pay Facebook in US dollars, but then you go to the Serbian, I'm from Serbia, so the Serbian variant of a social network, which we don't have, and then have to pay in Serbian dinars. That would make no sense. But for some reason, we accepted that in Web3. Account abstraction solved that. And that was 5 sentences. I'm sorry. I misestimated.
No, that was all good. That was very helpful, actually. Kind of gives you a sense of like what like, you know, what the next step is for the user experience. Because you know, just being a kind of DeFi user myself, I've just, even though I use it all the time, I run into all sorts of crazy things where I think, like, you know, anyone starting to use crypto or DeFi for the first time, there's a ton of things you can just, you know, mess it up, lose all your money or something. So I guess that brings me to a good next question, which is like, or some of the best ways to kind of build more secure and reliable Web3 applications. From what I've seen, a lot of, you know, even the DeFi apps that I, you know, would never have assumed would have any issues or would ever get exploited, even though a lot of these protocols do extensive audits, you know, from these big auditing firms. A lot of them still end up having some, you know, some tragic exploit in the end. And so, like, what are some of the ways that we can kind of move past these incidents?
I think I think frankly, like, I don't think so there is an easy answer to this. Like the best example is, you know, even like see like the Web2 sort of companies, or, you know, the technologies being much more mature than Web3, and still you see a lot of these hacks. Because I think people kind of construed it more like just as a developer attack, but I think some of these things are, you know, much smarter and like much more nuanced. Like it's not even like, you know, something like you can like really ensure. Like there are a few things, obviously there is a good checklist, and I think over time, especially with DeFi ecosystem, right, given the fact where we were like 2 years ago, And I think how the whole ecosystem has kind of come together. Especially I think the Yearn finance team, I think those guys have like really pushed the standard in terms of, like how do you get like the DeFi security, where security is not an afterthought in terms of development. So I think, yeah, I think it's kind of the mindset. I think that only can help is like, yeah, because there is no way you can guarantee like zero risk or zero security stuff. But what you can ensure is like that mindset is always there where you're, prioritizing security over speed, which I think has been always given, like how Web3 moves, people kind of do the opposite. So, and I think people like a lot of times good dApps, like you can kind of, by basically like compare which are good dApps or just not so good, depending on how they treat security as kind of a thing, because yeah, that's kind of underrated. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with being, security first or security minded first. I mean, there's definitely a lot of best practices that, I mean, just in general that you should do, right? Keep things simple, security first mindedness. One of the things that I like about Web3, at least contract development, is that it is a constrained environment. You can't really bloat the code because you pay for it, right? So then if you can't bloat the code, then you really have to start thinking through what problem am I trying to solve? What is the simplest way to do that without overcomplicating things? And that starts to reduce your vector. I think the second thing that I would want to bring up is that, what are the stakes for your dApp? What is the potential loss? Because you can do very expensive audits, you can do testing, you can offer very high price bounties. If you have a lot at stake, then I think there's a lot that you have to reward users with, right? If you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of a potential exploit, being able to offer bounties like that is usually a better way to find security than like an audit. An audit will only find so much, but if you can incentivize, I think going back to the earlier part of the conversation, it's really about incentives in Web3. If you can incentivize the community to help find these exploits before it's too late, so to speak. I think that's the best practice that I've seen a lot of people succeed with. I mean, when the stakes are high, right? Obviously, if you're trying to get off the ground, you're a smaller dApp, it's not necessarily something that you can do. But like, what are the stakes? And then what are you going to do around those stakes?
I would like to add a couple more things. I guess contrasting to Web2, security through obscurity isn't a thing. So for people who aren't familiar with the term, it basically means if most of the applications in Web2 are closed source and have a very small API which you can communicate, the damage it can take is very small. Web3 in the sense, especially the EVM, is like everybody's part of the same MySQL database and everybody can write to each other's database tables without any permissions. And then you have to hack permissions on top via your smart contract. I think that's one. The second thing, which I like as a movement slowly happening, and this is a huge shout out to the Hats Finance team, is I still find it extremely surprising that auditing teams or audit companies don't have their skin in the game. So I like what Hats Finance is trying to do, where a part of their audit is staked actually against them for a certain amount of time. And then only if the protocol doesn't get hacked or doesn't get a bounty submitted or whatever, they get part of the money back. Because if you look at the most audits, they're like, we're done here, we did our best, but we're also not liable in any way, shape, or form for what happens. I remember when I was a part of a much larger Web2 company, the companies that were doing the security audits were legally liable if that particular part of the system was exploited, which makes sense. And then you add the incentives also there as well. So I think we're going to see a huge movement there, like in the second one. And then the first one, I completely agree with Chris about the simplicity playing a huge role in this whole thing. Oh, and sorry, finally, one more thing. A thing developers should learn is, again, we're seeing less and less exploits when it comes to the code itself. I mean, you do see reentrances here and there, but the game theoretical hacks or money market hacks are much more apparent. So akin to Web2, you cannot crash Stripe completely. You cannot drain Stripe from billions of dollars to hack this small website that you want to get free shoes from. In Web3, you can kind of hack this protocol that everybody thought would be okay and has $1 billion inside of it to hack this small app for like $200,000 and close out that team. So I think we're still having a tough time reasoning about that because it's a new problem space that didn't exist before Web3, basically.
Yeah, it's all kind of crazy if you think about it. You know, these incentives, like, you know, we've been talking a lot about them today. They're you know, a major driver for user behavior and activity, and you know, a lot of the things that end up happening. And I would say even with the exploits, when you know, when you think about the perspective of like a potential hacker or exploiter or whatever, and you know, they see hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in front of them, you know, potentially, you know, you can kind of see why, like, you know, some of these incentives might be like drastically skewed for you know, an auditor who might just be trying to, you know, get the job done versus someone who is like looking for one single life-changing play or something. But you know, incentives are like spread out throughout Web3 as a whole. I would say you can kind of see them everywhere. For every protocol, there's like a new token. I'm curious how you guys see them. What's sort of like a good way to use incentives, and are they relevant for let's say like community building? Because one of the problems I see, you know, is all this, especially with all these new app chains and stuff, we have liquidity and developer mindshare kind of spread out all over the place. And so how can we like use incentives perhaps, or what are some good ways to, you know, build community and to sort of, you know, aggregate liquidity and capital mindshare into, you know, one single task? Sorry, that might be a crazy question, but, you know, feel free to, you know, take a stab at any part of it.
Well, I think when it comes to incentives, they're very tricky, I think, to get right, because like say you're doing an airdrop, or say you're doing some sort of like liquidity incentive, you'll get a huge tail of like people that are there just for the incentives. And it's just sort of like that they want to grab the they want to grab the airdrop and go, like, to hedge their bets. Maybe this thing will take off, maybe it won't, right? And so incentives alone, I don't think build community very well. Now, where I've seen incentives do get right, or where airdrops have gone right, is like with Arbitrum and Optimism, for example. They base their incentives off of quests, right? Like, learn about the ecosystem, operate, you know, various transactions, various mechanisms within the ecosystem, and get rewarded for it. I do think that's probably it. There's still a long tail of people who are just going to go through the motions to get the tokens, but that's also a really great way for people to sort of like grab on and start to create believers in that system, right? Because really, when you're talking about community, Web2, you know, Web2 or Web3, it's about trying to get your application in front of people that become the true believers, people that see the value, people that see and believe in what you're doing. And so I think incentives is a mechanism, but I do think that it's not the only mechanism, right? You have to follow it up with a lot of traditional community building, like reaching the users where they are, being able to run Telegram groups or Discord groups, or really engage with people and sort of like build the energy around. It takes a lot of consistent work, where incentives play a part of it as like, I don't want it to minimize it to like a marketing factor, but as a way to sort of like get your name out there. But the hard work is really in like maintaining that community and building it, you know, with, you know, sort of traditional community managers, community techniques, and being able to bring your users together to be a true believer.
I think it's also a case of before airdrop started to be a thing. So let's say 6 months to a year before the Badger DAO airdrop. I think that was one of the first high-profile ones that happened. And at least it feels like that and the Uniswap one, etc. People were using the thing because it was useful. Like, people use something because it's useful. And now we ended up in this situation where people expect things to have an airdrop. Even when you have these companies that say they will never have an airdrop, everybody, just for the sake of it, let me try this thing out. I do agree with Chris that while people are going through these motions, some of them will stick around. But I think that at least right now, it's the lost battle where people will just do everything for the sake of the token, and that's it. until it dies down a bit, it was similar to yield farming and the rest, or MEV or other stuff. We're going to find product market fit for tokens and airdrops. Until then, everybody's going to use the thing just for the sake of getting the airdrop later on, and that's it.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I have any additional thoughts to what I think already Chris and Bogdan mentioned.
Yeah, that all kind of aligns with like how I think about all these things. We're kind of, like Bogdan said, we're kind of stuck in this cycle now where airdrops are kind of expected, but you don't really want to talk about it, and it's kind of always this elephant in the room almost. But it's still very interesting to see how eventually we might actually get some interesting incentive token models or something, but for now I think we've mostly seen a lot of the same. All right, so I'll ask kind of a random simple question, but just what role do you guys see NFTs playing in the future of Web3? We've got a lot of hype about NFTs over the past year. It seemingly came out of nowhere in like 2021 or so. And so curious what you guys see, how will they be used in the future?
I can take this one. So I think NFT, firstly, I think the name is not like, kind of very, very good, because it's still a very developer kind of centric. And what I always believe, is like, I think Web3 needs to kind of use a language that's much more like, understanding to the folks. And I think a good example is what Reddit did with their digital collectibles or avatars thing, right? Reddit recently launched these avatars as part of their mobile app and didn't call it NFT, just called it digital collectibles. And I think there's some value to that, essentially because then they're actually talking about the value proposition, not actually the underlying infra. Like, and that's kind of what really needs to change. I don't think so calling each and everything, because NFTs is used in like multiple things. Like I can like give you a sense of like right now there are so many use cases. Like in gaming, it's kind of used in a different way. Then someone uses more for verification purposes. That's a different kind of NFT. Finance, or like Uniswap and stuff, those use NFT in a very different sense. Or you have some of this like the Quest, as we discussed earlier, like the educational kind of thing, they use it very differently. Or for example, ENS or unstoppable domain uses it very differently in terms of domains. Like for example, Starbucks on Polygon is using it more for their loyalty rewards kind of a thing. And kind of it's going on and on. Like I think the important part is not highlighting NFT as a core tech. NFT is definitely like the sort of gateway for anything that you end up doing, because it's a cool way to keep like token gated stuff. And eventually like this is a good way for brands also to come in, and like projects are also to build in. But talking about actually the value proposition, I think that's kind of what needs to and I think that's what is already starting to see, like even with like Bored Apes new sort of metaverse and few other things. No one is talking about the underlying infra, and I think that's kind of a sign of maturity of how the ecosystem is. Now people are talking about value proposition. Like that's kind of how people talk in Web2. No one talks about the underlying whatever things people use. It's kind of the value proposition that it brings, and why should I use it, it kind of gets answered. And like that's when you will have a lot more non Web3 native folks joining sort of the ecosystem.
Completely agree. I'm actually going to ask everyone a question. This might sound like a tangent, but I think it won't. What's WhatsApp, the chat application? What's it most known for?
Just messaging,
Instant messaging?
and yeah.
End-to-end encrypt. Correct. In which language was it written? Erlang.
No idea.
Exactly. So nobody gives a damn in which language it was written. But here we highlight like, hey, this thing makes sense because it's like an NFT. I'm sorry for the dogs, by the way. Anyway, so so everybody highlights this thing because it uses NFTs, and I completely agree with Sanket. Until we stop talking about the thing being useful because it's an NFT, people won't come. And then until we solve a real world problem, which by the way, getting into an NFT party isn't a real world problem. So until we get tickets being sold on I don't know, Ticketmaster or whatever, and them being NFTs, and people actually not knowing them being NFTs, we haven't achieved what we set out to do. And yeah, so just wanted to echo Sanket with that question about WhatsApp.
Yeah, I think you guys both brought up a lot of really good points. It's like you've like rattled off a bunch of like use cases that I think went by very quickly. I'm really bullish on NFTs, and precisely for like what you were talking about, like how different people are using them and how people are exposed to them. I think in some ways, the NFT explosion was great for the ecosystem because it brought a lot of sort of non-Web3 natives, a lot of like traditional users into the ecosystem and got it paying attention. On the other hand, I think there's been this stigma now with NFT and like pictures of apes or like some sort of like digital JPEG, like the artistic use in some of the cases that, you know, the popular NFT dApps were doing are great, but it is so much more. Like in other places where I've talked, it's been about like these other use cases, sort of as Bogdan and Sanket were mentioning, less about the tech and more about like the problems it's solving. And if you can do so in a way, like I think most people don't even know that ENS is an NFT underneath it, right? Or very few people know. But it opens up a lot of use cases, and ENS by itself doesn't present itself as like, oh, I'm an NFT. This is something that I want to collect. Like that's where I think the power lies. And I think that's where a lot of the opportunity lies. There's a lot of really interesting projects that I think are coming down the pipe where NFT plays a bottom layer solution where you may not even know it exists or why it's there because there's no like picture in your wallet or whatever, but will unlock a lot of power and a lot of, you know, sort of that next level within the ecosystem.
And by the way, Bored Apes are great. I mean, great. You can have one position or other, not because they're an NFT project, but because they're a very good brand. So the NFT part is kind of just an implementation detail of a great brand, not the underlying success of it.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys are all basically like saying that you know, the actual experience and the value proposition or the product or brand or whatever it is more important than the underlying tech itself. And seems like, you know, NFTs might play a role in the future, but might not look exactly, you know, like flipping JPEGs like today, I guess. But I guess maybe to push that a little further, like, and, you know, let me know if you guys, you know, can't think of anything or, but, you know, are there any like types of applications or any specific examples you guys can think of where, let's say, you know, the user experience or the application itself sort of supersedes the underlying tech, and where it's like very obvious, I guess, what the value of this particular application would be to like other you know, maybe non-Web3 users or something. Yeah, might be a tough question because I can't really can't think of anything specifically, but so I thought I'd just throw that onto you guys.
Yeah, no, I think Reddit is a good example, and maybe I can explain like why is it. So if you for I think Reddit, obviously people might know on the call, but just few years ago they launched their own app, and as part of that they kind of started pushing like, you know, the avatar. It's essentially like, you know, just having like a profile picture on, let's say, Twitter and stuff. Now, what I think Reddit realized over time is they are probably the biggest community sort of a thing. And this is where probably blockchain is a good use case, because they have been like exploring this for quite some time. And I think there's a very good talk recently at the Paris Blockchain Week from the CEO himself. I think people who are interested should definitely talk of how actually Reddit thought through that whole process, because it was kind of a journey for them since last 4 or 5 years. Now, I think that avatars exist as a PFP. they've created a non-custodial wallet. And right now, as I think, if I'm correct, I think there are more than around 11 million wallets that have been created, and these are all non-custodial within the Reddit app itself, when no one needs to know what is kind of happening. People just use it and kind of trade it, let's say on OpenSea. People who understand, people who don't understand, really don't really care about those things. So I think that's a very good use case. Secondly, I'm not sure how many people have are here from US, but it's kind of only open to US. Starbucks, their famous loyalty program, they kind of brought that whole thing into NFT, where I think they kind of created a way for people to kind of engage with each other. They do it in a very Web2 centric way, but underlying that is kind of an NFT, and those NFTs are traded secondary. For example, I am a lazy person. I want to get, let's say, the next 5 coffees free, right? Either I can do like the hard work, or I can just go buy an NFT. And I think so. Those are very small things, but very, very unique use cases, because when you think of it at scale, these things really matter a lot. Because earlier kind of in the kind of traditional or like the Web2 world, some of these things probably won't exist. Like there is no way you could have just used a Reddit avatar, kind of take it out and like put it or share it with someone else. So I think those are like very interesting things, and I think you are seeing a lot of these things where the underlying tech is not known, and it's kind of abstracting literally everything. And I think that's how the mainstream adoption looks like, where people are not talking NFT, even DeFi for that matter, or any of these other buzzwords we keep talking about.
I guess to bring Web3 closer to Web2 people, unfortunately, I think gambling applications on Web3 are very straightforward. I'm not a supporter of gambling as an activity, but I think that's like the one that's easiest to explain. For use, this is usually for countries that have a huge expat community. Serbia is one of them. Cross-border payments and not having to pay to Western Union, like 20% of the whole thing being transferred. Although then there's the problem of off-ramping, but at least people understand the value there. And then if I can pick a Web2 thing that can explain Web3 to Web2 people, it would be in-game skins in video games, Fortnite and CSGO. CSGO or any Steam game like Team Fortress or CSGO specifically, because you can trade them on their own system. It's not Web3. But basically, I think people, especially now where most of the people who are professionals, or at least new professionals, have been playing video games their whole lives, or at least in part of their lives, I think it's much easier to explain now. And then especially to the next generation. So, yeah.
Taking it in a sort of a different direction, like native Web3, the thing that kind of comes to mind to me is something like Argent. Like they were doing sort of early account abstraction before account abstraction got, really blew up. And I think that, my experience with that was a lot easier. I mean, it costs a little bit more because you have to be able to mint the wallet. You have to be able to deploy the wallet, the smart wallet. But it was what they did was they took a very, I don't want to say Web2, but I would say user-centric journey on it, right? And so like from the minute you open it up to the minute that you onboard it, they have this sort of curated experience where you don't really understand like the tech underneath it, like how everything is implemented, but it's very smooth, right? Like you open your wallet, you all of a sudden have like yields and ways to interact with liquidity pools. And so I feel have a very polished look in terms of a lot of sort of like Web3 things. I think that's a really a good example to contrast maybe the Web2 and non-Web3 things with what I think is a good Web3 execution.
By the way, unpopular opinion, I think it's okay to use Web2 as a complement. I see you instantly corrected yourself. I know it's unpopular, but like Web2 has very good applications. Not all of them, but some of them have very good user experience.
Yeah. I mean, it's really when I corrected myself, it was really around because it's not really Web2. As I was trying to go through my mindset, Web2 is it mobile? Is it the user experience? And really, it is about the user experience. And you're right, like Web2 does have a really really good user experience, but I don't think it matters Web2 or Web3. Like it's really about the user journey and how you can make that user journey optimal for the users.
Yeah, I think that's actually your guys' answers gave me a lot of sort of more inspirational. You know, after seeing all the crazy stuff, sometimes you start to think like, you know, there's nothing of actual value. But you know, when I think about it, like even with like you said, like with video games and like Fortnite and Call of Duty or something, you know, I'm always like I can see like there's a natural demand within a community, you know, for certain in-game items and whatnot. And it will be really interesting to just see how like these different worlds kind of get integrated with Web3 and like how they actually just sort of complement each other in the end. But I guess we're getting kind of close to the end. I would say one last question maybe is, and we'll take some questions from the audience too if we have them. But what advice would you give to developers who are just starting out in Web3? What kind of resources do you recommend for getting caught up to speed? And then, you know, if there's anything else you want to mention or, you know, you think is important, feel free.
I'll try to take this one first. On advice, I would say understand the fundamentals. Right. It is a steep learning curve. I think, you know, writing your first contract in Solidity is one thing, but really understanding what's going on, sort of, you know, to reflect past questions in this conversation where we talked about, you know, the 0 to 1, the tooling space, sort of the breadth of knowledge that you need. You know, I would say find your rabbit hole, the thing that you're interested in, then go deep on that, because by extension, you'll have to go deep on other things as well, and really get an understanding of what's going on when you send a transaction, how your smart contract is processing, like how all of these things interact. And there is like a lot of material out there, as Bogdan mentioned, for the 0 to 1, and then you just gotta bite the bullet and go to the 1 to 10. And for all the people out there, please contribute back your learnings in the form of blog posts or your share, because like as a community, this is how we get stronger, right? Understanding the concepts and then wrapping it in your own perspective. Maybe somebody else vibes with that, and they get a better understanding, right? For the resources, as much as crypto Twitter gets bagged on a lot, I do like crypto Twitter. There's a lot that gets surfaced in there. If you follow, you know, the right projects. The other things that I use is Weekend Ethereum for Ethereum specific stuff, and Masari, I think, they do great content. And Masari is like one of those types of things where you can really do a deep dive on a specific subject. So I really like that as a resource.
I guess for smart contracts, reading audits is also a very good way of learning that. It's very rare that a security company will publicly say something in that sense. Like in Web2, they would be liable, but it would be private. I think that's an interesting. I mean, also everything that Chris mentioned, I'm trying not to echo everything. Actually, the websites of all of the L1s also, L1s and L2s usually have very good getting started documentation as well. If you pick Solana, the Solana documentation. If you pick Ethereum. If you pick Polygon. I think that's useful. I cannot echo more the fundamentals part. I also think the same thing for Web2 as well. I mean, knowing how operating systems work is also very important, and most people skip that thing. And then also not feeling the need to reinvent the wheel for everything. A pet peeve of mine is that this whole space constantly tries to reinvent everything. We shouldn't forget what happened, what is still happening in Web2. It still isn't done, by the way. So our battle still hasn't succeeded, but basically trying to figure out, hey, Web2 actually did this thing correct. Let's not try to reinvent it, because there was like tens of thousands of human souls and like thousands and thousands of years poured into this thing. But now I'm going to write my own framework. I know what I'm doing. Like I just started here. So just trying to understand the fundamentals, juxtapose it against the thing that you already know from Web2, and then actually try to learn the differences that are there in Web3.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I would like really recommend in general, I think on the developer, you know, resources, I think be active kind of on Twitter or, you know, some of the like larger Telegram group, because as a whole Web3 is still very small. So you can get all the help, like if you're just visible and like sort of learning in the open. There are many examples of folks doing something like this. And like second thing is, just use the dApps. I think a lot of times I've seen like, people who kind of create something in kind of their own bubble, but like actually never think from a user centric. I think customer centric perspective is like a very big thing in Web2. Like you always start thinking from that. That's kind of how they teach. I think in Web3 it's kind of all backward. So I would just suggest, like, whoever it like when you're building something, like always think and probably use those apps, because it's not as smooth as probably you thought they are. Just given the complexities and the self-custodial nature of some of the wallets and tooling that we use.
Cool. Thanks for those responses, guys. I think we have one or two questions. So someone asked how, I guess for a new developer in the Web3 space, how would you get noticed and put yourself out there to attract attention? For, I guess my immediate like take on that would be to just, I guess kind of similar to what Sanket just said, to just it, from my point of view, and the way that I kind of got into crypto, and the space is just also just using the apps and kind of figuring out what's out there first, and then kind of getting an understanding of the experience. That's kind of a good first step. But then I guess moving on, and then how do you start to contribute value back into the space? I guess that's the more interesting question. So curious what you guys feel.
I would like to answer this question with a question as well. If someone was a Java developer, let's take Java, like a boring language, and you were trying to get a job somewhere, I think we kind of in this space started getting like, how can I become a Twitter persona as well? If you were looking for a Java job, you wouldn't start with, hey, how would I attract attention on Twitter? So I think it's a thing that it's a young space, so everybody's fighting for attention there. But I think I think it should be the side effect of you bringing value. I mean, back to what Kevin mentioned, but getting noticed isn't a thing that happens intentionally. At least I think it does. For it to happen healthy, it's other people bringing attention to you than you drawing attention to yourself, if that makes sense. So contribute to your favorite dApps, even to the documentation, help on Discord, fix a bug on the UI. So those boring things, which by the way I think are extremely important, are the things where you will start getting noticed. Then you will start working on bigger parts there, maybe even join the core team. And I think that's how it starts. And then if you're bringing enough value, the attention will come itself.
Yeah, to say probably the same thing in a slightly different way. I feel like Web3, because it's a public database, essentially, it's a very open source OSS type, oriented community. Everything is oriented, toward community built projects, community managed stuff. Getting involved in DAOs is a way to contribute back and to start, getting known in the space. And building from the ground up. If you can contribute code. But as Bogdan said, if you can get, in the door doing other things that are not code, documentation, passion for the project and passion for the space, I think goes a long way. When you produce public goods work with groups, people notice that and will want to include you into projects, right? And so it is, what can you do for the community versus, how do you project yourself to be in the space?
Yeah, I think I'll just probably leave with one line is, you can't actually learn Web3, you have to live Web3, because the space at which this industry moves, like there is no way, there's a very high possibility you learn something and 3 months later, those things are not actually used. So you constantly have to be updated, and for that you just need to sort of, not learn, but kind of live like Web3 in general.
It was similar for DevOps, by the way, when it started. It was also, it's not the position, it's a movement. And I think it's, by the way, and I think it was correct for DevOps at that time. And I completely agree that we're there right now in Web3.
Yeah, seems like a good way to, leave a closing message, which is, it seems like the most important thing really is to just, stick around and get involved and stay up to date and not, get lost in, a lot of distracting controversies, or just, get depressed about the space or anything. Yeah. Great. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. We'll have all the information for you guys if you want to get in touch with any of these great guests here today. We'll have a recording up on YouTube, I'm pretty sure, and we'll just cut that out if we're not going to do that. But thank you so much. And yeah, it was good talking to you guys. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Likewise,
Thank
thank
you all.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.